This is Dateline News and Conversation. Oh, the topic tonight, there'll be several. Um, we're going to start out by talking about Donald Trump um, guaranteeing that anybody who protests or expresses dissent against him and his policy in Israel or Israel's genocide of the Palestinians. My guest tonight, my good friend, Bruce Gagnon. Bruce, welcome back to the show.
Howdy, Regis.
Hey, it's good to have you. So look, I've been following your blogs. I've been following our dear friend Lisa Savage's blog, and she recently posted a blog that just got my blood boiling. Uh, you guys in Maine have been protesting, I think weekly, maybe more often, for months now, uh, against America's involvement in the genocide of the Israelis. Now, people are being deported, people are being arrested, university people are losing their jobs, university students are being kicked out, can't finish their education. Tell me what's going on in Maine, first of all, and whether or not you and your friends, my friends, feel threatened.
Well, here in Maine, we have been protesting every week, and that's been happening all over the state and all of the, well, really, communities of any size and even smaller ones. People have been protesting. Uh, there's two different kind of protests that are happening here. One is about Gaza, and that was happening all the way back to the time of the Biden administration when they were facilitating this genocide in Palestine. The numbers were not that big, but they've been steady across the state. But then after Trump got elected, now the Democrats suddenly are hitting the streets. But we've seen repeatedly that when the Democrats, loyal Democrats, go out and protest, they don't carry signs about Palestine and Gaza. They just talk about how much they hate Trump and all that kind of thing. So there's really within the protest movement across the state, there's essentially two factions. Those of us that are protesting wars and those that are protesting Trump, particularly. But we had a protest Thursday here in Brunswick. On Friday, I drove north with my wife, Mary Beth, to Blue Hill Library, about 2.5 hours north, where I was hosted to speak at the library there. Really good turnout, excellent discussion and meeting. And then on Saturday morning, drove back in a snowstorm to Bath, Maine, to Bath Iron Works, where the weekly Lenten vigils are happening at Bath Iron Works, where they build Navy destroyers that today are operating in 3 different places. One is in the Red Sea, shelling the living hell out of Yemen. The other is they're operating, trying to encircle and provoke Russia. And then thirdly, in the South China Sea, where they're trying to encircle and provoke China. So these warships, they're now working on about 6 or 7 of them at Bath Iron Works. We were protesting there. And as the snow was melting and large puddles of slush and water were were growing around where we were standing with our signs, as the Bath Ironworks workers were departing at noontime, some of the pickup trucks, they would drive real close and then spray that slushy water onto us, into our clothes. And so several of us got soaked. So that when we left there, we had to go home and change clothes because just a little while later, we had a protest in Topsom, Maine, one of monthly statewide protests that we have. In this case, we didn't have as many people come because of the snowstorm. There were just 10 of us there, but we had to go home and change clothes before we went to that protest. But in every case, we're seeing an increase in the amount of honks and waves, positive signs we get from the public, which indicates that people are coming around on this issue of genocide in Palestine. And then yesterday on Sunday, my wife and I went to the local movie theater. It's kind of an alternative movie theater here in Brunswick, where they were showing the film that just won, excuse me, the Academy Award documentary, No Other Land from Palestine, a really amazing film about the ongoing, it's over about a 4 or 5 year span. This documentary was covering the Israeli military destruction of villages in the West Bank in a particular area, a particular region, a whole series of villages, mostly people that were sheep and goat herders, and just really dramatic. And the theater was packed, which was a good sign. And at the very end, I was so upset and so angry about what I was seeing. I stood up as the credits just began to roll, and I yelled out in my strongest voice, "Free Palestine, stop supporting Israel's genocidal Holocaust, and come to our protest every Thursday at noon, just outside in front of this theater at noontime." And anyway, so that's basically a quick look at what we've been up to lately here. And in addition to that, people like Lisa and I are blogging and sharing things on Facebook and Twitter and other such social media as much as possible.
I have two things to say before I ask you my next question. Uh, there's almost no mention of this Israeli genocide in Palestine, Gaza, the bombings of Lebanon, Syria, um, the threats of the United States to Iran. It's not covered. I mean, you have to look really deep to find an article about it. Obviously, everybody here in
Where?
Russia is focused on Trump, Putin, the talks, ending the war in Ukraine, continuation of the war in Ukraine.
You're
Um,
saying there's no coverage of this Palestine issue in Russia.
that's correct. Hardly anything in the media here.
Why?
Well, I think because the people here are focused on their own problem, uh, ending this war, hoping it's going to end. Thousands, untold thousands of Russians have died, and there are families everywhere who, and I mean everywhere, tens of thousands who have lost a son or even a daughter. So I just want I mention that because I want to come back to what's happening in the United States. And what I said in the beginning, Lisa's article angered me again because I have been very critical of the American public who have not been speaking out, well, for a long time. They've not been speaking out about the war that Obama and Biden and now Trump have continued in Ukraine, but is silence there. And now where the genocide in Palestine is out there, uh, people know about it. And I've been saying for a long time, the American public, because of their silence, have blood on their hands.
Oh yeah.
And and it angers me. It angers me terribly. Um, when I look at what's happening in the United States, it doesn't matter now that Trump is president. The country is still so divided. There's so much conflict. There's so much anger and hatred. And when you compare that to what's going on here in Russia, things are very peaceful. Things are very quiet. Things are very harmonious. Life is going on as usual. And we don't get this daily dose of anything coming out of the West of the United States. Now, I want to ask you this. Um, you've been arrested over the years for your protests many times. Um, have you been arrested recently for your protest against the United States involvement in the genocide in in Palestine, in Gaza? And have you been banned from any locations in Brunswick?
Yeah, I was arrested in New Hampshire at an Elbit Systems factory. Elbit is an Israeli weapons corporation. They've created these Elbit Systems factories all over the world. We found out they're in Korea, they're in England, they're in various other countries, as well as the United States. So a group of us did a blockade one morning. This was in the past year that this happened. Uh, and So we did a blockade one morning, stopping the workers from going to work, and we were arrested. Also, the students at Bowdoin College here in Brunswick did a 5-day occupation of the student union, and I was going every day, standing. It was in the middle of winter, severe cold, huge amounts of snow this deep. And I was going every day and standing for a couple hours with them, as long as I could put up with it, with the cold. And I went in one day, the door was sort of open, and I went in and uh, to just cheer them on. Basically, I stayed for literally 2 minutes, held up my sign that said, "Stop funding Israeli terrorism." And then I went out. And anyway, after it was all over, the students were first told they were going to be suspended, but uh, alumni from Bowdoin College from all over the world were threatening the college that they were never going to donate ever again if they didn't stop any action against the students. So finally, Bowdoin did kind of back off. And so the day after it was all over, there was a doorbell ring here in our apartment. My wife went to the door. She called me to the door, and there's a Brunswick policeman standing there with uh, with a warning, a trespass warning, saying that if I stepped onto Bowdoin College property in the next year, I would be arrested for trespassing. Now, how did they know who I was? How did they know where I lived? You know, all of those questions people are asking. But I refused to sign this thing. So he just handed it to me. The cop didn't know anything about it. He said, "We were asked by Bowdoin to deliver this to you." But as it turned out, I was the only one that faced any real consequences for this particular action. But I was thrilled to be there, standing with them in support of them. They did a great job, great organizing. They really got the student body deeply involved in this issue. And so those kind of things were happening all over the country at campuses, as you know. But then the threats came down from Trump and from Congress, and the administrations of these colleges were threatened with loss of money. Columbia University did a major cave in began uh, firing and getting rid of students and everything else and faculty. And now there have been protests growing again at Columbia University because of the way that some of their faculty and students were apprehended by masked people from unmarked cars, no giving no identification whatsoever. I mean, they could have been mafia for all we know, which and they were taken away to unknown places. And so anyway, the protests are growing again at some of these colleges. So it's a real tense situation here in this country, but not nearly as bad as it is in Gaza right now and in the West Bank, where the massacres continue. More than 1,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the ceasefire that was working well until Israel began to violate it. And now, since then, 1,000 people have been killed. Just in the last couple of days, 15 Gaza medics and rescue workers were found handcuffed and killed and buried in unmarked graves with 20 shots each, 20 shots for each of the 15 that were found dead and handcuffed. So, I mean, Israel is just on a rampage right now. They're forcing expulsion orders again in Rafah, people being sent further south or north, rather, to other parts of Gaza, to Khan Yunis and other places. So it's crazy. Well over 50,000 dead so far now. Many people believe it's 100,000 because so many bodies are still buried under the rubble. So it's deeply insane what Israel is doing. I am very happy to see that Malaysia, the government of Malaysia, has said they're introducing a resolution at the United Nations to expel Israel from the United Nations. I think that should be amended to also expel the United States as well, because the United States is fully backing this, still supplying bombs and everything else, reconnaissance information, targeting information to Israel. So anyway, that's the story. Uh,
Yeah, I'm so angered and outraged when I think about this and when I'm confronted with it, like now, speaking with you. Um, I, I don't know how to describe it other than saying that it is pure evil. It
yeah,
is satanic. It is not of this world. Uh, and for the people of the world, the countries of the Middle East who are standing there, except for Yemen, doing nothing, terrified of the United States and what will happen, terrified of Israel. They all know that Israel has the nukes. Um, how the world can watch this and let it continue is beyond me. Um, now, let's talk a little bit about um, the Israelis are not just targeting Palestine and Gaza. Jesus, they're bombing Lebanon. I don't. I think are they bombing Jordan, um,
no,
Iraq,
Syria,
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 Syria? They are threatening Iran, and
yeah,
Donald Trump is out there with his bullhorn threatening Iran. He's going to blow them up. He's already said we're going to bomb Yemen to hell.
yeah,
Uh, Two things here. What the is wrong with Trump? And his people are still, these MAGA people are thinking he's great. But here he said, I want to be known as the peace president. And you see
yeah,
what the man is doing and what he's saying. You see pictures of him. His face is filled with rage and anger. I can't find any other way of describing this than saying he's part of the evil.
Well, I tell you what, in this country, people are using the word evil more and more all the time to describe what's happening there, whether it's Israel or the United States. People are calling all of our actions evil, and they're right, as you're right. The United States, Trump is now deploying various bombers, B-52s, B-1, B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean at US bases there. They're sending in refueling aircraft so that if and when they do go after Iran, they would be refueled by these planes that they're sending there now. Some people are saying that it's all bloviation, that Trump is just trying to force Iran into a new deal. And Iran has said that they won't be pressured into a deal. So we'll see what happens. But Iran has said that they will react forcefully against US interests if they are attacked. And what that means is Iran is, if you look at a map, Iran is surrounded with US bases in the region that are very easily reached by Iran weapons, just as they can reach Israel. And so if the United States does attack Iran, I'm quite certain that US bases in the region will be hit, and there will be problems for Washington as a result. In addition, the Strait of Hormuz, where so much of the global oil trade is transited through, would likely be closed by Iran, and the global economy would suffer dramatically. So I would imagine that behind the scenes right now, there's all kinds of negotiations going on in various capitals about trying to stop the United States from initiating such an attack that could bleed into World War III. So on the one hand, we see Trump supposedly trying to end the Ukraine war. If he truly wanted to, all he's got to do is stop sending weapons and stop giving intelligence information. There's a New York Times story that has just come out that tells how the US base in Wiesbaden, Germany, has been in charge of giving all the targeting information to Ukraine to hit Russian troops throughout this war. And so it's quite clear that the United States could easily stop this war overnight if they really wanted to. I'm not so sure that Trump really does want to. Sometimes I think, well, maybe he wants to so he can concentrate on war with China. But then other times I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure that they really want to stop the war. We'll see. Time is going to tell.
A couple of comments I want to make. You talked about Iran, and it's no secret that in the past year, Russia has signed a very extensive, comprehensive agreement with Iran that had to do with economic issues, development, and military. Uh, Russia has been a very good friend of Iran for a very long time. And when you said things may be happening behind the scenes, I have to think that Russia, because of its interest in that region, not only with Iran, but Syria and Israel, uh, but over here we don't hear hardly anything about what Russia might be doing. But I have to believe they're involved in that. The other thing, you mentioned this New York Times article, and we segue back to Ukraine again. I happen to believe that the United States and the UK are connected by an umbilical cord. They're twins. Um, I believe that Trump is now coming out and saying, well, we want peace over there. We want to have this ceasefire. And yet Ukraine has violated it more times, striking deep into Russia. And it's the UK that's behind it. The UK does not. The United Kingdom, Britain, has been wanting to take down Russia for centuries. Their bankers, the Rothschilds, they have been lusting for Russia's resources. You and I have talked about that many times. How complicit Donald Trump is with what's going on, like you, I question. I wonder. But, Bruce, I have to make the point from a Russian perspective. The Russians continue to move deep into Ukraine. I'm reading articles over here where Russia looks at Odessa as one of its own. You and I have been there. Majority Russian speakers. Strategically, that port, Russia is never going to give it away. Russia is moving further and further every day. The Lugansk area is almost completely liberated. I've read where the Donetsk Republic is about 80% liberated. And nobody here, or even some of the major military correspondents in the United States, have said this war is already over. Russia has already won. I don't know how, Bruce, the people around Trump, okay, can be delusional, in denial, or just, I don't know, don't believe what's really happening on the ground in Ukraine. And Trump just came out, I think it was yesterday, with the time change sometimes, I don't know what day it was. He said he's angry and pissed at Putin. Jesus, here he's saying Putin and I are really friends. We trust each other. And now he comes out publicly and says, I'm angry and I'm pissed at him for what he's doing because he thinks Putin doesn't want peace. Bruce, you know, people people in the United States, I think, have got to be so overwhelmed with all the bullshit, all the bloviating, as you say, all of the bombastic statements, the contradictions. Trump is commanding the 24/7 news cycle, and it's got to be screwing people's heads big time. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm sure it is. I've been hearing anecdotally that people, well, like when I spoke in Blue Hill Library the other night, there were people in the audience during the question and answer time that were saying that they were telling stories about various Trump supporters that had become disillusioned already, you know. So I think that is happening, and I think it's going to increase. It's interesting to me that some retired military people like Larry Johnson and Colonel McGregor, Douglas McGregor, are saying that they see the Trump high-level, diplomats and staff and everything else as amateurs, and that they're really in over their head.
Yeah.
But I think it's very conceivable that Trump has been playing a game that, okay, yeah, look at me, yeah, I'm trying to work out a solution to the Ukraine war, and I'm trying to do my level best. But I can't do it now, as you're saying that it's Putin's fault. I thought he was going to cooperate, but he really isn't. That could have been the game plan all along, to try to pin it in the end back on Russia as an excuse to continue to fight. But on the other hand, let's be honest, as you say, Russia's winning this war. Everyone always knew they would, and that the West is running out of military hardware. The United States is in a bind too, as well. And here we are at $37 trillion in debt in this country. And we really can't afford, the taxpayers of this country can't really afford to continue to fund this war. And I think people are figuring that out as well. People are getting very afraid that they're going to somehow shut down Social Security. This is becoming a big issue in this country, that people are getting really worried about losing Social Security. And if that happens, oh my God, you know, I don't know how many people are on it in this country, but it's millions and millions and tens and 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s of millions of people rely on Social Security. So uh, anyway, I think the Trump administration is fully controlled by AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, his donors. Many of his appointments are Israeli operatives. So it's no wonder that he is, talking a peace, but not really delivering. It's no surprise.
You know, I just attended a 2-day conference on Thursday and Friday here at the historic Levadia Palace, the site of the 1945 Yalta Conference with FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. And there were about 100 people, some from different countries, and some in different countries participated through video. Um, Most of the conversation was about uh, the current problems between the United States and Russia in terms of geopolitics, but basically the two countries. And many of the speakers were very critical in condemning the United States, and but there were a few uh, whom I spoke with personally who said they were very optimistic and hopeful about Trump. In my presentation, um, at the very end, and it was the last thing I said, I would caution your optimism about Donald Trump. You all know, and Putin has said it as well as Lavrov, that the United States is agreement incapable. So please do not be fooled again by the United States posturing. And you know, Bruce, I've talked to a number of my friends, ordinary people here in Yalta and Crimea. Many of them too are very hopeful about Trump. You know, they hear this, oh, we're going to make friends again and we want to do deals with you and we might take back some of the sanctions. And I say the same thing to them. Friends, Trump is no different than any other previous president, maybe in the history of the United States. Please do not get too excited. Um,
Well, I think to underscore that point is Greenland.
oh,
Why does Trump want Greenland? He's making a big push to try to grab it from Denmark. Uh, it's all about the Arctic. It's all about control of the Arctic. The United States doesn't have a very large border with the Arctic. Russia has the largest one, of course. But Greenland, if the United States can make a grab on Greenland, then they have a larger area of which to challenge Russia for control of the Arctic. And so I think that right there should be a warning to anyone seeing how hard Trump is working on Greenland. The bottom line for me is there's no difference really between the two political parties. Biden was fully on board in the war in Ukraine, fully on board with genocide in Gaza, and Trump essentially is carrying on the same policy. There's no real difference because the deep state that I think is controlled by Wall Street, by Israel, and by the Rothschilds, all right, that international banking cartel that they run. I think those influences control the United States, just like they control most of Europe and Israel and other parts of the world as well, Australia, New Zealand, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, no, I agree with you. And when you when you connect the dots, as you're doing right now, why the United States needs Greenland, well, it's obvious. The United States already controls most of Russia's borders, land borders, with Western and Eastern Europe. Now, if they can get that land grab in Greenland, whoa! Now they've got Russia surrounded. They already have some bases on Greenland anyway, uh, but now they have this. They own it. Oh my God! When you look at a map, and when Russia looks at a map, and they looks at where the United States is, if you can only put yourself in Russia's shoes, Bruce, you and I have talked about it. You know, if Russia had a base with missiles anywhere around the United States, in the Caribbean, or in Mexico, or South America, like they did in Cuba, America would go, they'd go crazy. And we
Yeah.
would have a nuclear war. And yet, when the United States does this, it's okay. Nobody gives a care.
Yeah.
And Bruce, you and I have talked about the danger of nuclear war for a lot of years now. Uh, I had said, with the rapprochement between Trump and Putin, the telephone calls between Rubio and Lavrov, the meetings in Saudi Arabia, uh, I said, wow, humanity maybe can take a giant step backwards and breathe a sigh of relief that we are not on the verge of nuclear war. Bruce, I have to eat those words, because with what you and I are talking about right now, what the United States is doing, forget what Trump is saying, forget what anybody else is saying. When you look at what they're doing, the threats to Iran, the threats to Yemen, and the threats to Russia, still the threats to Russia, supporting what's going on in Ukraine and now wanting to grab Greenland. If you're Russia, you're thinking, we got a big job on our hands to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And we will. And Putin has said that, and we will.
Now let me talk about some of the good things, because there are some good things underway. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom and negative about everything, which I have been, and I have good reason to have said these things. But something really wonderful happened the other day. Rubio, who I hear is banned from coming into Russia. Is that true?
I haven't heard that.
No, no. Anyway, I haven't seen him go to Russia yet. And any discussions Rubio's had with Lavrov, I think, has been over the phone or in another country. But anyway, Rubio was in Jamaica. And you know how after the meeting, the American and the Jamaican leader stand at podiums and they have, closing news conference. And Rubio took advantage of that to complain about Cuba sending doctors to Jamaica and how these people were being exploited. Rubio was so concerned about these Cuban doctors that they were being exploited, not paid. And, so anyway, when the Jamaican leader got up, he basically called out Rubio and said, it's not true what you're saying. We're very appreciative of the Cuban doctors here in Jamaica. We've lost a lot of our medical people. They moved to other places because we can't afford to pay them enough. They get paid more, in America and other places like that. But the Cuban doctors are being paid. They're not being exploited. So drop that line. Well, that indicated to me that countries in the global south are feeling more freedom, more latitude, more um, empowered to speak out against the United States. Uh, and it's because of China and Russia and BRICS, the growth of BRICS. And so this is the good thing that's happening in the world today. Now, Trump has said when he became president that his first priority was going to be to destroy BRICS. And that's one reason why I think he's coming out with these tariffs. He's now saying that he wants to put tariffs on everybody that the United States trades with, which I think would be a complete and utter economic disaster for the US and the world. So these guys are so desperate to stay in charge. They're so desperate that they're losing their empire since World War II. The United States, with its 800 or 900 military bases around the world, has been a military and economic empire. They're so afraid that they're losing it. They're now essentially declaring war on the world, whether it's economic war or military war. And it's all going to backfire. And the United States' empire is going to collapse. Now, the question is, in this moment of desperation, are they willing to literally use nuclear weapons and World War III to try to stay in charge? And that's the ultimate question. And that's the real challenge for people who claim to be lovers of peace around the world. Now is the time to organize, to be on the streets protesting, to be calling out the United States and its allies in Europe and other parts of the world, whether that's Japan or the Philippines or Australia, New Zealand, places that are under the thumb of the United States empire today. That's the challenge for our time.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's going to have to take a massive, worldwide, non-violent, non-participation in what's going on in the world today. Now, I want to go back to what you just talked about with tariffs that Trump is levying on everybody. And now I think on April 2nd, he's going to unleash this whole barrage of tariffs. And, American people have to be crazy to think that they're going to pay more money for stuff they desperately need and have depended on for decades and decades now, certainly since Clinton and NAFTA. Uh, we're now paying for offshoring all of that stuff for cheap labor to get cheap prices. That's all going to change. And if he thinks that's going to create jobs in America, he's out of his freaking mind. America's lost its industrial base, its manufacturing base. It's lost its domination in terms of steel. The Rust Belt in America is rusted. There's nothing coming out of there anymore. Um, you know what somebody said here in Russia at this conference? Exactly what we were talking about. I think it was only one guy, and Tanya translates for me, so I don't understand everything immediately. But I did talk to one guy afterwards, and what he said was the only one. He said what you said: America is going to collapse. What it's doing is not sustainable. It's turned the whole world against it. And
There's
that,
let me
yeah,
comment more about this. I just read yesterday that the last steel production facility in the United Kingdom just closed down.
yeah,
And so we're not only going to see this collapse in the United States, but it's going to be in England. It's going to be throughout Europe as well. And I wonder if they're not doing this intentionally, if they're not doing this on purpose in order to bring the living standard of the West down to this neo-feudal level, reintroducing feudalism to the world, right? That they then, because they don't really need so many people. I saw the other day that Bill Gates is saying that AI was going to even allow the need for doctors to be diminished, that they'll be able to use AI and robotics to operate on people in the future, so that much of the population of the world are superfluous populations now. They're not needed. because of computerization, robotics, AI, and all that stuff. So they don't want to have these what they call useless eaters demanding, food and jobs and everything else when they don't really want to give it to us anymore. So I'm wondering if they're not intentionally creating this collapse of quote unquote Western civilization because we got too high and mighty, bring us down to the level of the third world, if you will, and then try to clamp down on the global south at the same time. But again, we go back to the rise of BRICS. One of my favorite places that I'm watching very closely, and I put a lot of stories on my blog about, is Burkina Faso. They've kicked out the French. They're building their own industrial base now. They're making cars. They're mining their own gold and other things like that. And so there's a real rise in parts of Africa now against domination, particularly France and Belgium, and the Netherlands, who were historic colonizers of much of Africa. So again, there's a counter reaction to all of this neo-feudalism today. But here in the United States, I think we're heading for neo-feudalism. And and their goal now is to create, I think, a civil war in this country. Apparently, I believe it was in New Mexico last night. Somebody threw a Molotov cocktail at a Republican Party headquarters building and started a fire. That could have been a false flag operation in order to create the divide even stronger here in the United States. So this is what I see coming. This creation of neo-feudalism, civil war conditions in the West as a way to reduce the Western standard of living.
Well, I'm glad you went there, Bruce. Uh, you and I have talked about this in the past. I have covered uh, this neo-feudalism, this technocracy, this post-humanism many, many times on shows, and I've pointed the finger repeatedly at the Rothschild international banker cabal, which is basically behind it all. And I'm glad you came to this tonight in this discussion because I do believe what is happening in the United States and the West, it is happening. It's worse in Europe now than it is in the United States. Inflation is out of sight. Bankruptcies are going through the roof. People are jobless. People cannot afford heat and fuel because of the Nord Stream pipeline blow up. Uh, and so all we have to do is listen to Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum. They are stating very clearly and have been exactly what you said. They don't need us. They want their golden billion. They only want us, what's left of us, to be serfs, serfs, not even slaves, serfs. They don't need us. Um,
They know that if they reduce Social Security and if they reduce jobs and they reduce, other economic benefits through welfare and things like that, that the people will die at an earlier age, right?
yeah,
It's, if they get rid of Medicaid and Medicare in the United States, we already have a terrible system of healthcare in this country, but they could make it worse by getting rid of Medicaid and Medicare, get rid of the VA, the Veterans Administration, that gives health care to veterans. So people are going to die at a younger age. It's another form of genocide. It's a slower form, a less visible form of genocide, but it's still genocide.
yeah. And it's what Klaus Schwab and others call the Great Reset. The Great Reset. They're going to reset what life is like on the planet. And it's all about technocracy. It's all about transhumanism, getting beyond who we are as humans. They want to program our brains, connect us to computers, and put chips in our heads. And Bruce, another thing that needs to be mentioned, there's so many dots that have to be connected. the United Nations Agenda 2030. It all sounds very nice, but it's linked with the World Economic Forum. It's all linked with reducing the population and bringing about this great reset. I'm glad we were able to bring this up tonight, Bruce. You know, oftentimes we finish the conversation on a particular topic. What's big in the news? And it isn't often that that anybody really connects all the dots because it's so confusing when you look at all these individual parts. But when you do connect the dots, it's like putting a puzzle together. It's like, wow, there it is. Um, you
Put the
know,
picture, put the picture on the wall so everybody can see it. That's my organizing philosophy. It is a puzzle. Put the pieces of the puzzle together on the wall and you can begin to see it. And it's hard to deny when the picture becomes clearer and clearer and clearer to us all.
I'm very hopeful uh, for the BRICS movement, which is being championed by Vladimir Putin. They just had their Congress last fall here in Russia, and thousands of people attended that. Top people from countries, presidents, prime ministers, secretaries of state, diplomats, economists, lawyers. It was, I was disappointed I couldn't get to go. There was no room. If you didn't have a special invitation, you wouldn't have a place to stay. You needed press credentials, which were impossible for a little guy like me. Uh, but I followed it very carefully. And more countries see the wisdom in what Putin says is a new world order that's already here. It's already growing. And Bruce, if we want to end on a hopeful note, it's got to be the movement, the BRICS movement, which is international. It is the global south. It's the Far East. Uh, it's all of these countries that are feeling left out. And I look at the BRICS movement and I look at Russia's involvement in it and I say, you got to bring it on as fast as they can. But you know what? I'm going to end on a somber note, but you'll have the last word. We talked about, you just did, what will those owners of all of this do, recognizing they've lost the battle for world domination? Will they blow us up? Bruce, in my 2012 film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, I ended it with that exact situation. Will these crazed people, recognizing they've lost the battle for the future order of the world, take us all down with them in a nuclear Armageddon? Bruce, I think you and I both believe we're still there.
We are still on the precipice. We are, and it motivates me. My son, who I adore and I love so much, and his partner are now having a child. I'm going to be a grandfather for the first time. I've always been motivated to organize, to protect the future generations. And now I have one more reason, one more really deeply personal reason to try to protect the future generations. That's everybody's responsibility. Not how much money you can make, not how famous you can be, not how big your house is, not how fancy your car is, not your best, education that you can brag about, with a PhD or whatever. No, that's not the job of a human being. The real job of a human being on Earth today is to protect the future generations. Thanks, Regis.